Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Bonney, speaker, MC, and redhead impersonator. This week, our conversation is about the Immigration Service offering Gender X, caregiver benefits at First Watch, autism acceptance, and more. Let's get started. Anne, welcome to the show. Can you please tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm one of those weirdos who loves change. And so when it comes to things changing around us that we have no control over, or things we want to change, or as is so often the need in DE&I, our mindset changes.
Yeah.
I've dealt with it all, so I'm speaking on it and having a good time.
That's awesome. So talk to me a little bit about your sort of speaker thesis. Like what are some of your big ideas?
Change is hard, and our brains are biologically built to resist it because if we've survived something before, it's safe. But if it's new and it's different, it's not safe. And that's like deep brain stuff.
Yeah.
Back when our brains were invented, and the world is very, very different now. And so understanding that we're battling that biological need for same and need for certain allows us to kind of dance in the discomfort zone, which is what I call it, of not knowing and of something not being like myself, so that I can, or like anything I've ever experienced before, so that I can move through this world today and not the world of where my brain was invented.
Well, I would definitely agree that a lot of people think that DEI work and sort of this topic more generally is very uncomfortable. So how would you suggest someone embrace change around the increasing diversity in our world, the expectations of Gen Z in the workplace, really the need to have these conversations that are just uncomfortable? How would you encourage someone to lean into that change?
One of the things that I encourage people to do is to ask why I believe what I believe, or why I have resistance to a certain thing that's different.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been exploring in my head, and I've never been able to have a substantive conversation with anybody about, is why do we have gendered bathrooms in the first place? Right?
Yeah.
And so when we start to question why we do certain things, we could start to say, well, is there another way we could do it that will work just as well?
Right.
And as the world is shifting and evolving, so many of our standards are based on the historical stuff that doesn't even exist anymore. So it's a really interesting, process to go through mentally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. So talk to me a little bit about your book, Get Over It.
Yeah, one of the things that I recognize is that people need inspiration in those hard moments, right? And ultimately, we know how to make change. But it's Tuesday afternoon at 4:45 when you've had a really stressful day and you're trying to get out of the office because you're trying to get to something else. Somebody calls you in a meeting and like asking me to be open-minded in that moment is really hard. And so I wrote this. It's a fun, I call it a fun jaunt through change, giving people little tips. They're not like long chapters and things, because oftentimes we don't have time to sit down and read it. So I joke about leaving it on the back of your toilet, because sometimes that's the only time you get 4 minutes to just read something. Grab 1 or 2 tips, marinate them on the day, as you kind of go through the challenges of the day, and hopefully that starts to work its way. That courage to take on change starts to work its way into your psyche.
I love that, because I do think that we need to be a little bit, we need to kind of trick ourselves a little bit.
Well, totally. Because again, you're fighting your biology. You're used to, you want same, you want certain, you want known. And when something is different, it immediately sparks that stress response. So being able to recognize that and move the thinking from that response part of your brain around to the thinking part of your brain is
Mhm.
key. Because then I can say, okay, wait a minute, this is different, but it's not bad. It's just
Yeah.
different. How else can I think about this?
Yeah, and I love that your tips are kind of bite-sized because, I mean, let's be honest, at least to me, thinking about reading kind of like a business book about change sounds really boring. But, you know, but when you're breaking it down in that way and when you have the kind of approachability that you have, and I know is in your writing style and in your work, we're able to really make those differences.
And sometimes those little bite-sized things are the things that actually sink in. I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but I can read, and I'm a big reader. I read a lot, but I can read like a whole paragraph and then think I have no idea what I just read because my brain was in 18 other
Yeah.
places. And so I knew this was a way to really help people get the knowledge in a way that was easy to digest.
Well, and honestly, it kind of aligns with the whole premise of 5 things, right? Good vibes and DEI. They are bite-size nuggets of, hope,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yep.
And so really it totally aligns there. And in this week's 5 things, one of the things that I wrote about is how, my small DEI firm has been impacted by our clients' budget cuts, by their change in priorities, by however they have been managing the economy. We have been impacted by that, which has meant that I've had to have some hard conversations with folks on my team. It's not always easy out there being an entrepreneur in when it has been some retraction. And yet I have so much gratitude for the work I get to do. And I'm going on a trip this afternoon, spending all day tomorrow with a client, and I am so grateful that I get to do this work and that I get to speak to people, to real humans about inclusion, about belonging, about psychological safety.
Yeah.
And I know that you're a speaker as well. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you stay connected to your work.
One of the things I love about the work that we do is we get to go into so many different companies and so many different organizations and hear in planning what I'm going to say to these people to try to inspire them to take on change and dance in discomfort and unknowns and all that fun stuff is you get to know their business, you get to know their challenges and those human connections. When we talk about belonging, I've done a lot of work overseas. I grew up overseas. And one of the things that I think has been massively beneficial about being able to be in different cultures and different countries and experience that throughout my whole life, or now being in different companies or different associations, different industries, is that I get to realize that all of us humans are very, very much the same. And we're dealing with some of the same challenges. And when you get up close to a company or a culture or people, your neighbors or somebody in it, whatever, you really realize the similarities are so much more powerful than the differences.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to just that fundamental need for belonging, not just in your family or in your workplace or whatever, but on the planet,
Yeah.
I think being able to move in and see it at the human level gives me such a strong affirmation that I belong on this planet, which I
Yeah.
think allows confidence and courage to come out because
Yeah.
I'm not fighting that fundamental lack of belonging here. So I think that's my
Yeah.
favorite part of some of the work that I get to do.
Yeah, I feel very similarly. I feel a very, very strong sense of purpose about this work. I know this is my purpose, right? And so it's hard to not be grateful to get to do this for a living.
Yeah, plus it's fun.
Yeah, it's
You know,
fun. It
being
is.
able to ease people's fears and ease
Yeah.
people's discomfort a little, even if just a little bit, or let them know the discomfort's okay.
Yep.
I think it's just it feels good.
Yeah, it does. All right. Well, let's keep feeling good and get into this week's good vibes. Okay. And the first story this week is from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, which introduced an X gender option on their naturalization forms. So, gender non-conforming immigrants can be represented. I mean, I just think that it's amazing. I don't know. I was so surprised by this, but I love it. I mean, they have gender X on passports, so it's not radical, but it's still surprising to me.
Yeah. Well, and this is like similar to the gendered bathroom question.
Yeah.
This is one where as I start thinking about the resistance to it, I start thinking logistically. Like I appreciate the human emotional benefit of this for people who are gender nonconforming. But in the other piece of this is let's look at logistically. Why is this a problem? Like why would this be something that we wouldn't include? Why not? Because ultimately, I think the purpose of this is for demographic data and like large scale understanding of who's out there, right?
That's right.
This should be part of our data. So I very much appreciate the emotional side of it, but I also appreciate the logistical side of what this allows us to do.
That's absolutely right. Because when we have better data about all humans, or at this case, all Americans, then that allows for resource allocation, right? And so we have a better sense of who's out there. We need it. Yeah. So I completely agree. Okay, well, let's get into the second story, which is about how President Biden shifted from autism awareness to autism acceptance in this year's proclamation. What? And Matthew, you can edit that out, please. In this year's proclamation, this reflects a broader movement advocated by autistic self-advocates to foster a society that accommodates and includes rather than moving away from fear-based awareness campaigns. So it's really interesting. Acceptance versus awareness.
And I like this. I love that we're exploring because words matter, and the words that we're using are really, really important. To myself, as I'm thinking through this, I'm not sure acceptance is the right word yet. I think it's better than awareness, but I think we still have a little way to go because I feel like for people who are not aware and not accepting, telling them to accept may kind of make them go, oh, that may create a little more resistance.
Sure.
So I do think, but I think that the whole exercise of really examining the language that we're using is the key important point here. And acceptance is an improvement over awareness, for sure.
It is. And as someone who grew up when coming out of the closet, when we were talking about tolerance, then acceptance seems like a long way, a big improvement. But you're right. I mean, who knows how the language will continue to evolve, because it should be, you're right, it should be much more than acceptance. It should be belonging and, whatever that ideal state is, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. The third story this week comes from California, which pioneered the nation's inaugural large-scale initiative to combat the disproportionately high unemployment rates among transgender folks, especially trans people of color. So the way this works is that for owners and managers, as an incentive to get them to hire more trans staff, the state is paying the first 60 hours of a new hire's wages, and owners and managers are attending a seminar on the issues that trans people face at work and how to support their staff. It's pretty cool.
It is a great initiative, and I love that it includes the educational aspect, because I think as we're approaching things that we're uncomfortable with, that's why I have my podcast, which is called Dancing in the Discomfort Zone. As we're approaching things that we don't know about, that we're uncomfortable with, the more we learn about it, again, it gets to that getting up close. And we start to say, oh, there's humans here. Oh, the similarities are such. Let me see if we can work around this, blah, blah, blah. And the other thing that blew my mind about that news article was it's a $150,000 grant. In the grand scheme of things, to be able to create this initiative for so little money feels like, holy cow, why wasn't this done before? And why isn't this done in other areas?
Yeah, I hope that it's a pilot program, because if it's successful, I think it would be a great model, especially at such a small initial investment. Yeah. It's what I like is the win-wins.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think everything should be a win-win, because I think that there are opportunities for everything to be a win-win if we can just compromise a little bit.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's this kind of innovative stuff as we talk about all the industries that I work in where the challenges are lack of staff, high turnover, all that stuff. If we can, a program like this creates not only employment, but loyalty.
Exactly.
And so creative thinking like this solves so many problems. So you talk about win-win, it's a win-win-win-win.
Exactly. And so is this next story, which is about the brunch restaurant First Watch, which introduced groundbreaking childcare and elder care benefits through a partnership with Bright Horizons to offer discounts. So in this particular industry in restaurants, these and types of initiatives, childcare benefits are very rare. And these benefits are available for all employees, part-time and full-time, regardless of their position. So, I mean, we need more win-wins because childcare is a big problem in our country.
Yeah. And it's one that parents cannot ignore.
Yeah.
You know, it's not an annoyance. It's not a should do. It's a have to do. Yeah. And so when it comes to creative solutions for the disengagement and high turnover challenges and lack of, employee challenges that places like this are having, this kind of creative solution, again, it breeds not only the ability for parents, single moms, all that stuff to come to work, but it breeds that loyalty because it says you care about what my actual problems are.
Yes.
And so, and now that you're doing this, I can come to work and be totally present when I'm here, knowing my children are well taken care of. And childcare, I mean, it is expensive, like ridiculous expensive.
So
and often,
expensive.
Less expensive opportunities are a lot less reliable, which makes them a less reliable employee, not because they're lazy or don't care or whatever, but it's because I can't ignore this. So this was my favorite one of the 5.
I can tell you are all fired up. I love it, Anne. Fired up, redhead imposter. All right. The last
impersonator, not imposter. I am a bit of an imposter.
Touche.
That works for me.
All right. The last story this week is about how the first Arab woman graduated from NASA. So I am going to apologize in advance for messing up this name. Emirati Noura Al-Martushis, she became the first Arab woman to graduate from astronaut training. So they even had a custom hijab for her. And it's just amazing to have that kind of possibility model. And I hate to bring firsts into the show, because I'm like, all right, enough already. It should have already happened, but we still have to celebrate all of the wins.
Well, and that was exactly my thinking on this one. I was like, what a bummer that we have to actually point this out and that this actually is the first Arab woman to ever graduate from the NASA class. And yet you're absolutely right to be able to say, hey, look, we're making progress. Let's pay attention to this, I think is the key message here. And hooray for her and whatever she needed to hurdle to get there and whoever helped her get there along the way. But I'm sure she's an absolutely brilliant woman.
Yeah.
That got there on a very, very good grounds.
Absolutely. And, breaking barriers, whatever they look like, we just have to keep celebrating them because, we need those. It's all comes back to hope. As far as I'm concerned, is we need to keep giving folks a sense of hope, which is, of course, what 5 Things is all about.
Well, and creating that opportunity for those little Arab girls to see her and say, oh, I could go to the moon and then brilliant to the moon. We're going way farther than that now, but I mean, that representation then turns into some incredible innovations down the line. So I'm excited about that.
I absolutely agree. You're absolutely right. Well, Anne, it has been an absolute delight having you on the show. Thank you so much. We had some good laughs today. Very fun. So tell folks how they can get in touch with you.
Yourchangespeaker.com is my website. You can get to social media and the books and the podcast and everything from there. So we'll just keep it nice and simple.
All right. Yourchangespeaker.com. Awesome. And this week's call to action is also to check out a book recommendation, The Boldly Inclusive Leader by my friend Minette Norman. Some great stories in this book with great principles of inclusive leadership. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you all for watching, for listening. Please rate and subscribe. And if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week.
Thanks, Bernadette.